The ice beneath Maxim Orlov's boots groaned like a dying animal as he stepped closer to the edge of the frozen pier. Behind him, his men held their positions, breath crystallizing in the sub-zero air. Ahead, silhouetted against the blizzard's fury, stood the Korean man who had cost him everything, and the black woman who had appeared from nowhere to change the game entirely. "You think loyalty is weakness?" Imani Reese called out, her voice cutting through the howling wind as she clutched the music locket that had started it all. "But you're wrong. It's the only thing that lets you sleep at night." Ryu Seongmin's hand moved to the silk tie around his wrist, the one she had tied there hours earlier, when the world was smaller and the stakes were just survival. Now, with Detective Monroe's unmarked cars closing in from 3 directions and the stolen ledger's secrets balanced on a knife's edge, everything hung in the balance. The storm had brought her to his door. Now it would decide whether they walked away together, or whether the frozen lake claimed them all. "Choose," Orlov said, raising his weapon. "The girl, or your empire." Seongmin's answer would rewrite everything. North Harbor wore winter-like armor, all glass and steel edges softened by snow that turned the lakefront city into something from a dream. Christmas night had emptied the streets, leaving only the whisper of wind through bare branches and the distant hum of holiday celebrations behind warm windows. Most people were smart enough to stay inside when the weather turned vicious. Imani Reese was not most people. She pulled her threadbare coat tighter as needle-sharp snow drove into her cheeks, each gust a reminder that desperation made people do impossible things. Her canvas messenger bag, everything she owned compressed into worn fabric, bounced against her hip with each step. Inside, a half-finished resume that promised skills she was still learning, warm socks wrapped in yesterday's newspaper, and the music locket that had belonged to her grandmother. The tarnished silver caught what little light the storm allowed, its lily engraving worn smooth by generations of worried fingers. The bag also held something else, something she didn't yet understand would change everything. 2 weeks. 14 days since her younger brother Caleb had kissed her forehead and promised he'd be back before she could miss him. He'd taken a cash gig. "Just a delivery," he'd said, grinning with the confidence of someone who'd never met real danger. The job was supposed to take him to the rich part of the cliffs, where people had enough money to pay kids like him to carry things they couldn't be bothered with themselves. Caleb was a tinkerer, a boy who could fix anything with moving parts and most things without them. He'd kept their mother's old sewing machine running years past its expiration date, had taught himself to repair phones by watching YouTube videos on the library computers. When their mother died and the insurance money ran out, Caleb's clever hands had kept them afloat until they couldn't anymore. The church basement shelter was warm enough, Sister Bernice kind enough, but Imani couldn't sleep knowing her baby brother was somewhere in the storm. The police had taken her report with the tired patience of people who'd heard it all before. Detective Monroe had been different, sharper, more focused, but even she could only promise to keep an eye out. In a city this size, one missing kid was a drop in an ocean of problems. The last bus had been suspended an hour ago. Her phone's battery was dying, the screen fogging with condensation every time she tried to check the map. She'd been walking for what felt like hours, following the dark ribbon of road that wound up toward the cliffs, where the rich people lived in houses that looked like fortresses. That's when she saw it. Grey Cliff's house. A single mansion perched above the frozen lake, its windows glowing warm against the storm's fury. It looked like something from a movie, all clean lines and expensive angles, the kind of place where people had heated floors and wine cellars and never worried about whether the heat would stay on through the night. Imani hesitated at the bottom of the long driveway. She'd been raised better than to bother strangers, especially strangers who could afford houses like this. But the wind was getting cruel, and her fingers were going numb inside her thin gloves, and desperate people made choices that would have horrified them on warmer days. She climbed the driveway, snow crunching under her worn boots. The door was solid wood, dark and imposing. She raised her fist and knocked, 3 sharp raps that echoed in the storm. The man who answered made her breath catch. He was beautiful in the way that made you forget to look away. Sharp cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Maybe 32, with the kind of quiet command that made you want to stand straighter without knowing why. He wore a dark turtleneck and wool slacks, dressed not for guests but for something else entirely, something that required vigilance. Behind him, she caught a glimpse of warmth and luxury, polished floors, soft lighting, the kind of furniture that cost more than most people made in a year. But what caught her attention were the screens on the far wall, a bank of security monitors that showed different angles of the house and grounds. This wasn't just a rich man's home, this was a fortress. "Please," she said, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "I'm sorry to bother you, but the storm—" She stopped talking when she saw his face change. His eyes had dropped to her chest, where the music locket hung outside her coat. Something flickered across his features. Recognition, surprise, fear. He went very, very still. "Where did you get that?" His voice was quiet, controlled, but she heard the edge underneath. Imani's hand moved instinctively to the locket. "It was my grandmother's. Why?" For a long moment, he just stared. Behind him, she heard footsteps. Other people in the house, moving with purpose. The security screens flickered and changed angles, as if someone was adjusting the cameras. Then, as if making a decision that would cost him, he stepped aside. "Come in," he said, "before you freeze." The warmth hit her like a physical thing, making her realize how cold she'd been. The house smelled like cedar and something else, something clean and expensive that she couldn't identify. A woman appeared from deeper in the house, elegant and sharp-eyed, studying Imani with the kind of careful attention that missed nothing. "Mira," the man said without looking away from Imani. "We have a guest." An older woman emerged from what looked like a kitchen, carrying a thick towel. She was small and efficient, with the kind of maternal authority that brooked no argument. "No one stays wet in my house, Khan," she said firmly, wrapping the towel around Imani's shoulders. "You sit. I make tea." "I don't want to impose," Imani started. But the man, Seong Min, she heard Mira call him, was already moving toward the kitchen. "You're not imposing," he said, pulling ingredients from cabinets with the ease of someone who knew his way around a kitchen. "Tell me about your brother." The question hit her like cold water. "How did you—" "You said you were sorry to bother me, but you knocked anyway. In a storm like this, that means someone you love is missing." He set a pot on the stove, measured rice and water with careful precision. "The locket suggests this isn't random. So tell me about your brother." Imani sank into a chair at the kitchen island, suddenly exhausted. "Caleb. He's 19, but he looks younger. He took a delivery job 2 weeks ago. Cash work, supposed to be simple. He was bringing something to this neighborhood, and then—" She spread her hands helplessly. "Nothing. No calls, no texts. Like he just disappeared." Seongmin's hands stilled on the rice pot. "What kind of delivery?" "I don't know. He said it was just a case, something small, easy money." She looked up at him, studying his face. "You know something, don't you? About the locket." Instead of answering, he turned the heat down under the pot and leaned against the counter, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "What's your name?" "Imani. Imani Reese." "I'm Seong Min. And yes, I know something about your locket. The question is whether you're ready to hear it." The juke was perfect, creamy and warm, with a soft boiled egg nestled in the center like a golden sun. Imani hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful hit her tongue, spreading warmth through her chest and down to her fingertips. Seong Min had drizzled sesame oil over the top, the nutty scent mixing with the steam that fogged the kitchen windows. "My grandmother taught me," he said, settling across from her with his own bowl. "She said warmth travels fastest through the stomach to the hands." Mira had introduced herself properly. Han Mira, corporate attorney, Seong Min's cousin. She sat at the end of the island with a cup of tea, watching Imani with the kind of careful empathy that suggested she'd seen her share of desperate people. The housekeeper, Yunji, bustled around them with quiet efficiency, refilling teacups and adjusting the heat. "The locket," Imani said finally, setting down her spoon. "You recognized it." Seongmin nodded slowly. "May I see it?" She hesitated, then lifted the chain over her head. The silver was warm from her skin, the lily engraving catching the kitchen light. He took it carefully, turning it over in his palm like it might break. "This pattern," he said, tracing the lily with one finger. "It's not just decorative, it's a mark, a symbol used by someone I knew a long time ago." "Who?" "My mentor, a man named Kim Jae-sung." His voice carried old grief, carefully contained. "He was killed 3 years ago." The kitchen went quiet except for the storm rattling the windows. Imani felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. "I don't understand," she said. "My grandmother had this locket for decades. She gave it to my mother, and my mother gave it to me before she died. It's just a family heirloom." "Look closer." Xiongmin's fingers found a tiny catch she'd never noticed, hidden in the lily's stem. The locket opened with a soft click, revealing not just the usual space for a photograph, but a second compartment, one that held a thin wafer of paper covered in numbers and letters. Imani stared. "I've had this for 5 years. How did I never—" "Because you weren't looking for it." He studied the paper, his expression growing darker. "These are route codes, warehouse locations, handoff points. They're old from before I cleaned house, but someone's been reactivating them." A shadow moved in the doorway. Park Do-yoon appeared like he'd materialized from the walls themselves, compact, precise, with the kind of stillness that suggested violence held in check. He moved to Xiongmin's side and whispered something in rapid Korean. Xiongmin's jaw tightened. "How many?" "3 vehicles. Moving slow, lights off." Mira set down her teacup with careful control. "All off?" "Maybe. Or someone using his methods." Xiongmin stood, the domesticity of the kitchen suddenly feeling fragile. "Do-yoon, pull the perimeter tight. Full surveillance." "Wait." Imani's voice cut through their preparations. "What's happening? Who's Orlov?" Xiongmin looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him making calculations. How much to tell, how much to risk. "Maxim Orlov is a businessman with flexible ethics. He's been trying to expand into our territory for months." "Your territory?" "I run a logistics company. We handle shipping, warehousing, transportation." His voice was carefully neutral. "Some of our competitors use methods we don't approve of." It was a sanitized version of the truth, and they both knew it. But before Imani could press for details, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, expecting nothing. The battery was nearly dead, and who would be texting her at midnight on Christmas? The notification made her heart stop. It was from Caleb's old tablet, the one she'd kept charged in case he tried to reach her. A messaging app she'd forgotten existed had picked up a cached Wi-Fi signal and delivered a message that had been waiting for 2 weeks. A cartoon otter in a winter scarf, geotagged from the harbour rail bridge. The caption read, "Too cold for this." Oh my God! Her hands shook as she showed Xiongmin the screen. "This is from the night he disappeared. He was at the bridge." Xiongmin studied the timestamp, then looked at Do-yoon. "Harbour rail bridge, that's—" "A blind spot," Do-yoon finished. "No cameras, no witnesses. Perfect place to make someone disappear." "Or to hide," Mira added quietly, "if you were smart enough to know you were in trouble." Imani's mind raced. The sticker pack, look at the designer credit. Otter Shop Studios. That's a local place, right? Someone might remember who bought this, or... An alarm chirped softly. Do-yoon moved to a wall panel, checking readouts that meant nothing to Imani, but made his expression go flat and dangerous. "Side entrance," he reported. "Motion sensors triggered." "How many?" Xiongmin's voice had gone cold, professional. "Unknown. They're staying out of camera range." The lights flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. Outside, the storm howled like something alive and angry. "Imani." Xiongmin's voice was gentle but urgent. "I need you to listen carefully. The people outside, they're not here for a social call. They want something and they think you might have it. Me, I don't have anything. I'm nobody. You have the locket. And now you have information about your brother's last known location." He moved to a drawer, pulled out something that made Imani's breath catch. An old silk tie, deep blue with silver threads. "My mother gave this to me. My grandmother always said that if you tie it around a man's wrist when he walks into danger, it anchors him to good fortune." He held out his hand, wrist up. Imani stared at him. "You're serious?" "Deadly serious." The alarm chirped again, more insistent. Through the kitchen windows she could see shapes moving in the storm, dark figures testing the perimeter, looking for weaknesses. With hands that only trembled slightly, she took the tie and wrapped it around his wrist. Her fingers brushed his skin as she knotted it, and for a moment the chaos outside seemed very far away. The silk was soft, warm from his body heat, and the intimacy of the gesture felt both foreign and natural. "There," she said softly. "Anchored." He looked down at the tie, then back at her. Something passed between them, understanding maybe or recognition, the beginning of something that would either save them or destroy them both. "Good," he said. "Now let's go find your brother." The lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red. Through the windows, flashlight beams cut through the storm like searching eyes. "Time to go," Doyoon said, appearing with a tactical vest and a look that suggested the evening was about to become very interesting. Seong-min moved toward a door Imani hadn't noticed, concealed in what looked like a decorative panel. "There's a tunnel that leads to the garage. We can—" The front door exploded inward. The flashbangs went off like thunder, trapped in a bottle, turning the world white and silent. Imani hit the kitchen floor, hands over her ears, as Doyoon moved with liquid precision, not toward the intruders, but toward a control panel that made the house itself fight back. Sonic bursts screamed through hidden speakers. Strobing lights turned the hallways into a disorienting maze. The emergency system was designed not to kill, but to confuse, to buy time for people to escape rather than stand and fight. "Move!" Seong-min's voice cut through the chaos as he hauled Imani to her feet. The hidden door was open now, revealing a narrow staircase that led down into darkness. "Mira, take point. Doyoon, 30 seconds, then follow." They descended into a tunnel that smelled like concrete and old water. Emergency lighting cast everything in harsh shadows, making their footsteps echo like gunshots. Behind them, the sounds of the house's defense system mixed with shouts in languages Imani couldn't identify. "Who are they?" she gasped, struggling to keep up with Seong-min's longer stride. "People who think they can take what doesn't belong to them." His voice was grim. "The question is whether they're after the locket, your brother, or both." The tunnel opened into a garage that looked like something from a spy movie. 3 vehicles, all black, all expensive, all ready to disappear into the night. Mira was already starting one of them, her lawyer's composure replaced by something harder and more focused. "Otter Shop Studios first," Seong-min decided, sliding into the driver's seat as Imani buckled herself into the back. If Caleb bought that sticker pack locally, someone might remember him. Doyoon appeared as they were pulling out, slipping into the passenger seat with the fluid grace of someone who'd done this before. 4 men, he reported. Professional, but not military. They were looking for something specific, went straight for your office. The safe? Untouched. They wanted information, not money. The garage door opened onto a service road that wound down the back of the cliff. The storm hit them immediately, turning the windshield into a sheet of moving white. Seong-min drove like he could see through the blizzard, following roads that existed more in memory than sight. "Tell me about Caleb," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos they'd just escaped. "What kind of kid is he?" Imani closed her eyes, picturing her brother's face. "Smart. Too smart for his own good sometimes. He's always been able to fix things, electronics mostly, but mechanical stuff too. When our mom got sick, he kept her oxygen concentrator running with parts from a junkyard and YouTube tutorials. Resourceful, stubborn. He hates asking for help, hates feeling like a burden. When the insurance money ran out after Mom died, he started taking odd jobs. Nothing dangerous, just—" She stopped, realizing how naive that sounded now. "Just cash work from people who don't ask questions," Mira finished gently. "The kind of jobs that seem harmless until they're not." The city looked different in the storm. Familiar streets turned alien by snow and wind. Most of the Christmas lights had been taken down by the weather, leaving only the occasional warm window to break the darkness. They passed a church where someone had left the doors open, golden light spilling onto the sidewalk like an invitation. "St. Bridget's," Imani said automatically. "That's where I've been staying. Sister Bernice runs a winter shelter in the basement." Seong-min glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Good people?" "The best. Sister Bernice used to be a nurse before she took her vows. She doesn't ask questions, just makes sure everyone has a warm place to sleep and something hot to eat. Imani's voice softened. She's the one who told me to keep looking for Caleb when the police said to wait and see. Smart woman. They pulled up outside Otter Shop Studios, a narrow storefront wedged between a vintage clothing store and a coffee shop that had closed hours ago. The neon sign flickered in the storm, casting pink and blue shadows on the snow-covered sidewalk. I know this place, Mira said, studying the storefront. The owner, Yasmin Belcourt, used to date a dock worker named Marcus Chen. He's been doing freelance work for some questionable people lately. Define questionable, Doyun said. The kind who pay in cash and don't care about labor laws. The shop was still open, a miracle on Christmas night, but artists kept their own hours. Yasmin was behind the counter, a woman with intricate braids and paint-stained fingers, working on a tablet while music played softly in the background. She looked up when they entered, her expression shifting from boredom to curiosity as she took in their group. "We're closed," she said, but without conviction. "We're looking for information about a customer," Xiongmin said, his voice carrying just enough authority to make her pay attention. "A young black man, maybe 19, who might have bought some of your otter stickers about 2 weeks ago." Yasmin's eyes sharpened. "You cops?" "No," Imani said, stepping forward. "I'm his sister. He's missing." Something in Yasmin's expression softened. She set down her tablet, really looking at Imani for the first time. "What's his name?" "Caleb. Caleb Reese. He's about this tall, has a scar on his left hand from when he tried to fix a garbage disposal when he was 15. He's always carrying some kind of gadget he's working on." "Oh," Yasmin's face changed. "Oh, shit. Yeah, I remember him. Sweet kid. Polite. He bought a whole pack of the winter otters, said his sister collected cute stuff and he wanted to send her something to make her smile." Imani's throat tightened. Even in the middle of whatever trouble he'd found, Caleb had been thinking of her. "Did he say anything else?" Mira asked. "About where he was going? Who he was working for?" Yasmin hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Look, I don't usually talk about customers, but if the kid's really missing..." She pulled out her phone, scrolled through messages. "My ex, Marcus, he's been bragging about some ice job he landed. Good money, he said, working for some Russian guy who pays in cash and doesn't ask questions. He mentioned something about a kid with magician hands who was supposed to help with a delivery." "Russian?" Doyun's voice went flat. "Yeah. Marcus said the guy had an accent, expensive clothes, and a scar that looked like it came from something sharp." Yasmin looked between them, suddenly nervous. "This is bad, isn't it? Like, really bad." Before anyone could answer, the lights went out. Not just in the shop, the entire block went dark, streetlights and traffic signals dying as one. Through the windows they could see the storm intensifying, but this wasn't weather damage. This was deliberate. "Back door," Xiongmin said quietly. "Now." They moved through the darkened shop, Yasmin leading them past easels and art supplies toward the rear exit. Behind them, the front windows exploded inward as something heavy crashed through the glass. "This way," Yasmin whispered, fumbling with locks. "There's an alley. Connects to the main street." The back door burst open before she could finish unlocking it. Maxim Orlov stood in the doorway like something from a nightmare, his pale eyes reflecting the emergency lighting from the street. He was exactly as Yasmin had described. Expensive coat, cultivated scar, the kind of presence that made the air feel thinner. "Mr. Ryu," he said, his accent turning the name into something sharp. "How nice to finally meet in person." Behind him shadows moved, men with the kind of stillness that came from professional violence. "Orlov." Xiongmin stepped in front of Imani, his body language shifting into something predatory. "You're a long way from your usual territory." "Territory is such a fluid concept, don't you think?" Orlov's smile was all teeth, "especially when someone has something that belongs to me." His gaze moved to Imani, specifically to the locket that hung around her neck. "I think," he said softly, "we need to have a conversation." The standoff lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough for Orlov's men to position themselves, for Doyun to calculate angles and odds, For Imani to realize that her brother's disappearance was connected to something much larger and more dangerous than a simple delivery job. Then the sirens started, not close, but not far enough away to ignore. The wail of police cars cutting through the storm, growing louder by the second. Orlov's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his pale eyes. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. "Another time," he said, stepping back into the alley. "But soon, Mr. Ryu, very soon." His men melted into the darkness like they'd never been there at all, leaving only broken glass and the smell of expensive cologne mixed with snow. "Move," Xiongmin said, already heading for the front of the shop. Before they decide the police aren't worth avoiding, they slipped out through the shattered storefront, Yasmin locking up behind them with hands that shook only slightly. The police cars were 3 blocks away and closing, their lights painting the snow in red and blue. "Detective Monroe," Mira said, checking her phone. "She's en route." "You called her?" Imani asked. "I called her the moment we left the house." Layla Monroe is one of the few cops in this city who understands that sometimes the lesser evil is the only choice you get. They made it to their vehicle just as the first police car rounded the corner. Detective Monroe was driving, a black woman in her 40s with tired eyes and the kind of authority that came from seeing too much and still choosing to care. She pulled up beside them, rolling down her window despite the storm. "Xiongmin," she said without preamble, "please tell me you're not about to make my Christmas worse than it already is. Someone's targeting civilians, Layla, a missing kid, stolen property, and Maxim Orlov playing games in your city." Monroe's expression darkened. "Orlov? That's federal territory. Not if he's using local assets, not if he's threatening local people." Xiongmin gestured toward Imani. "This is Imani Reese. Her brother disappeared 2 weeks ago, and now Orlov seems very interested in something she owns." Monroe studied Imani through the storm, taking in her worn coat and worried eyes. "What kind of something?" Imani pulled out the locket, showed her the hidden compartment and the coded paper inside. "I didn't even know this was here until tonight, but apparently it's connected to my brother's disappearance." "Route codes," Monroe said, recognizing the markings. "Old ones, from the look of them. Someone's been reactivating abandoned smuggling routes." She looked at Xiongmin. "Your routes?" "Former routes, cleaned out 3 years ago when I took over operations." His voice was carefully neutral. "Someone's been using our old infrastructure without permission." Monroe was quiet for a moment, windshield wipers fighting the snow as she processed the information. "The missing kid, Caleb Reese. I remember the report. 19 years old, last seen taking a delivery job to the cliffs." "That's him," Imani said. "He sent a message from the harbor rail bridge the night he disappeared, a sticker from Ottershop Studios." "The bridge is a dead zone for surveillance," Monroe said, "but there's a maintenance facility underneath, old customs checkpoint from when the harbor was busier. If someone wanted to hide something or someone, that's where they'd do it." Another police car appeared, then another. Monroe spoke into her radio, coordinating a response that would look routine but give them the cover they needed. "I can give you 20 minutes, she said. "After that, this becomes an official investigation, and you'll need to answer questions you might not want to answer." "Understood." They followed Monroe's unmarked car through streets that grew emptier as they approached the harbor. The storm was getting worse, turning familiar landmarks into ghostly suggestions. The harbor rail bridge loomed ahead, a steel skeleton that connected the old industrial district to the newer commercial areas. "There," Doyun said, pointing to a service road that wound beneath the bridge's supports. "Maintenance access." They parked in the shadow of the bridge, the wind howling through the steel girders like something alive and angry. Monroe had brought backup, 2 officers who knew how to be discreet, who understood that sometimes the law worked better when it bent a little. The maintenance facility was a concrete bunker built into the bridge's foundation, designed to withstand both weather and time. The door was heavy steel, secured with locks that looked newer than the building itself. "Someone's been here recently," Monroe observed, studying the fresh scratches around the lock mechanism. Doyun produced a set of tools that definitely weren't standard issue for logistics companies. The locks yielded with surprising ease, suggesting they'd been picked before, and recently. Inside, The facility was larger than it looked from outside. Old customs equipment gathered dust in corners, but there were signs of recent habitation: a camping blanket, empty food containers, and something that made Imani's heart race: a violin case sitting open on a makeshift table. "That's not Caleb's," she said, moving closer. "He doesn't play music." The case was lined with foam, cut into precise shapes that had nothing to do with musical instruments. Whatever had been stored here was gone now, but the impressions suggested documents, small electronic devices, maybe cash. "Professional job," Monroe said, studying the foam cutouts. "Someone who knew exactly what they were moving." Imani was exploring the rest of the space when she found it. A string of improvised zipper pulls tied to a support beam, each one painted with a tiny otter. "Oh my God! Caleb!" "What?" "He does this, leaves little breadcrumbs when he's somewhere new. Started when we were kids and got separated at a mall. He always said if I could follow the trail, I could find him anywhere." She followed the zipper pulls deeper into the facility, past old equipment and forgotten storage areas, until she found a maintenance hatch set into the floor. It was secured with duct tape, and underneath the tape was a key card with a familiar lily watermark. "The locket," Xiongmin said, understanding immediately. "The codes on the paper, they're not just route markers, they're access codes." Imani compared the numbers on the paper to the watermark on the keycard. When combined, they yielded coordinates, not for a warehouse or a drop point, but for a location beneath the old Luminara canning factory. "He's there," she said with sudden certainty. "Caleb's there." Monroe was already on her radio, calling for additional units to converge on the factory. But before she could finish the call, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. "Shit," she said, reading the screen. "Orlov's convoy just left the harbor district. 3 vehicles heading for Luminara." "How long do we have?" Xiongmin asked. "Maybe 10 minutes, maybe less." They moved with the efficiency of people who understood that time was a luxury they couldn't afford. Monroe coordinated with her backup, while Xiongmin and Doyun checked equipment. Mira pulled up building schematics on her tablet, mapping the fastest route to the factory's underground levels. "There's a service tunnel system," she reported. "Connects to the old storm drains. We can get in without being seen, but once we're inside, we're committed." "What about Orlov?" Imani asked. "What about him?" Xiongmin's voice was cold. "He wants the locket, he wants the codes, and he wants to eliminate anyone who can connect him to your brother's disappearance. We're not giving him any of those things." The silk tie around his wrist caught the light as he checked his weapon, a reminder of the promise she'd made, the anchor she'd tied to keep him safe. Looking at it now, Imani realized that the promise worked both ways. He was anchored to good fortune, but she was anchored to him. "Let's go get your brother," he said. Outside, the storm reached a crescendo, as if the city itself was holding its breath for what came next. The service tunnels beneath Luminara canning factory smelled like rust and old fish, decades of industrial history compressed into air that tasted like metal and regret. Imani crawled through passages barely wide enough for her shoulders, following the beam of Doyun's flashlight as it cut through darkness that seemed to swallow sound. Behind them, Monroe's voice crackled through radio static, coordinating with units that were taking positions around the factory's perimeter. Ahead, somewhere in the maze of abandoned processing equipment and forgotten storage areas, her brother was waiting. "There," Doyun whispered, pointing to a maintenance hatch set into the tunnel floor. "According to the schematics, this should put us directly under the main processing floor." The hatch opened with a groan that sounded like the building itself was in pain. They emerged into a space that had once been the heart of North Harbor's fishing industry, massive steel vats and conveyor systems now draped in shadows and silence. And there, in a corner where someone had rigged a camping blanket and a light borrowed from an emergency exit sign, was Caleb. He looked older than his 19 years, his face drawn with exhaustion and worry, but his eyes were alert and clever. When he saw Imani, his expression crumpled with relief. "Mani," he whispered, using the nickname he'd given her when he was too young to pronounce her full name. "I knew you'd find me." She wanted to run to him, to wrap him in her arms and never let go, but Xiongmin's hand on her shoulder held her back. Something was wrong. Caleb's position, the way he sat with his back to the wall, the careful distance he maintained from the entrance. He wasn't just hiding. He was guarding something. "Caleb," she said softly. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Scared, but not hurt." His gaze moved to Seong-min, taking in the expensive clothes and the quiet authority. "You're him, aren't you? The one they're all afraid of." "I'm someone who wants to help," Seong-min said carefully. "But first I need to know what you took." Caleb's laugh was bitter. "What I took? I didn't take anything. I tried to give it back." He pulled something from inside his jacket, a microfilm cartridge, the kind used for storing large amounts of data in a small space. This was supposed to be a simple delivery. Drop off a violin case, pick up an envelope, easy money. But when I got to the drop point, I saw what was in the case. "What was it?" Mira asked. "Documents, financial records, shipping manifests, names and dates, and amounts that added up to something ugly." Caleb's voice was steady, but Imani could hear the fear underneath. "I recognize some of the locations, places where kids from the shelter go missing, where people disappear and nobody asks questions. So I switched the cases, gave them a fake, kept the real one. And the microfilm? Master copies. Everything they thought they'd destroyed when they cleaned house 3 years ago." He looked directly at Seong-min. "Your predecessor kept better records than you thought." The sound of vehicles outside cut through their conversation, engines in the storm, doors slamming, voices calling orders in multiple languages. Orloff had arrived. "How many ways out?" Do-yoon asked, already moving to check sight lines and defensive positions. "2, Mira said, consulting her tablet. "Main entrance and a loading dock on the north side. Both are probably covered by now." 3, Caleb corrected quietly. "There's a storm drain that connects to the harbor. It's how I've been getting food and supplies. But it's narrow, and with the storm surge, it might be flooded." "Better than staying here," Seong-min decided. "Orloff won't negotiate. He'll eliminate witnesses and take what he wants." They moved deeper into the factory, past machinery that looked like sleeping giants in the darkness. Behind them, the sound of forced entry echoed through the building, metal on metal, the systematic destruction of barriers. The storm drain was exactly as Caleb had described, a concrete tube that led toward the harbor, with water rushing through it fast enough to be dangerous but not fast enough to be impassable. They could hear voices above them now, Orloff's men spreading through the factory with professional efficiency. "Wait," Imani said as they prepared to enter the drain. "The locket. If this is all about the records, why does Orloff want it so badly?" Seong-min paused, understanding flickering across his face. "Because it's not just a key to the codes. It's proof of authenticity. Without it, the microfilm is just data. With it, it's evidence that can stand up in court." Evidence of what? Everything. 3 years of corruption, murder, money laundering, enough to bring down not just Orloff, but everyone who worked with him. He looked at the locket around her neck. "Your grandmother didn't just carry a family heirloom. She carried insurance." The sound of footsteps above them was getting closer. They had minutes, maybe less, before Orloff's search reached this part of the building. "Go," Seong-min said, gesturing toward the drain. "I'll buy you time." "No." Imani's voice was firm. "We go together or we don't go at all." "Imani!" "You're anchored, remember?" She touched the silk tie around his wrist. "That means you don't get to sacrifice yourself for the greater good. That means you come home." For a moment, he just stared at her. Then, incredibly, he smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him all night. Together, then. They entered the storm drain as the first flashlight beams cut through the factory above them. The water was knee-deep and moving fast, carrying the detritus of the storm toward the harbor. They moved in single file, Do-yoon leading, Mira and Caleb in the middle, Seong-min and Imani bringing up the rear. The drain opened onto the harbor just as the storm reached its peak. Waves crashed against the pier with enough force to shake the ground, and the wind carried voices, Orloff's men, spreading out to cover all possible escape routes. "There!" Monroe's voice cut through the storm. She was positioned behind a shipping container, her backup spread out in a semicircle that would give them cover. "Move!" They ran across open ground, exposed for precious seconds that felt like hours. Behind them, shouts erupted from the factory as their escape was discovered. Ahead, Monroe's officers provided covering fire that was more about intimidation than lethality, enough to keep Orlov's men cautious, not enough to start a war. They reached the police perimeter just as Orlov himself appeared at the factory entrance. He stood in the storm like he owned it, his pale eyes finding Seong-min across the distance. "This isn't over," he called, his voice carrying despite the wind. "Yes," Seong-min called back. "It is." He pulled out his phone, pressed a single number, and spoke 2 words. "Release everything." Across the city, servers activated, files uploaded. Evidence that had been carefully compiled and verified began flowing to news outlets, federal agencies, and international law enforcement. 3 years of patient investigation, triggered by a single call. Orlov's expression changed as he realized what had happened. The microfilm wasn't the prize, it was the trigger, and he'd just walked into a trap that had been 3 years in the making. "You think this ends it?" he snarled. "I think," Seong-min said, "it ends you." The federal agents arrived 20 minutes later, moving with the kind of coordination that suggested they'd been waiting for this moment. Orlov was taken into custody, along with his remaining men, charged with everything from human trafficking to conspiracy to commit murder. The storm began to break just as the last police car pulled away. Months later. The bookstore smelled like coffee and possibility, afternoon sunlight streaming through windows that Imani had helped Gianna Moretti clean until they sparkled. Lark and Thistle had become more than just a place to work. It was a community center, a gathering place for people who needed stories and warmth in equal measure. Caleb was in the back room fixing an ancient cash register that had been giving them trouble for weeks. His hands moved with the same careful precision they always had, but there was something different about him now, a confidence that came from knowing he'd faced real danger and survived it. "Almost got it," he called out, the sound of his voice mixing with the gentle murmur of customers browsing the shelves. Seong-min appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of tea and wearing a simple sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. The silk tie was gone from his wrist. They'd kept it, but it lived in a drawer now, a reminder of a promise kept rather than a talisman against danger. "The winter meals program is fully funded through next year," he said, settling beside Imani at the community events table. "Sister Bernice says they're serving twice as many people as last winter." "Good." Imani leaned into his warmth, watching snow fall gently outside, the kind of snow that promised beauty rather than danger. "That's really good." The locket hung around her neck still, but its secrets were no longer hidden. The lily engraving caught the light as she moved, a symbol transformed from burden to blessing. Outside, North Harbor settled into evening, a city learning to trust again.